Hello and welcome to Study with Sudhir, your digital classroom, and today we are going to be looking at a short story from the ICSE Class 10 English Literature syllabus, and that's called The Little Match Girl. But before we start, the usual reminder, do subscribe to the channel and also press on the bell icon, and do share this video and other playlists with your schoolmates and friends so that more people are able to benefit from the lessons that we have put out here from English, history, and also we'll be doing from civics, geography and biology. So let's start without wasting any time. The Little Match Girl by Hans Christian Andersen. What kind of a story is The Little Match Girl? It's a short story. It's a slightly ominous story. It leaves you with a very sad feeling. It leaves you feeling very cold as well because it's set on the night of the 31st of December. So you can kind of imagine the mood and the atmosphere that the storyteller has managed to create in this short story. He was a Danish poet and writer, Hans Christian Andersen, and he's basically remembered for his short stories and plays written with children as the protagonist. And here also it's a little girl who, mind you, is not identified. We do not know the name of the girl. She's only referred to as the Little Match Girl, and we'll know the reason why she's referred to as the Little Match Girl. But the larger theme essentially is that of sympathy, is that of empathy, it's that of coldness, both of the weather as well as of the people around in that place on the night of the 31st of December. The other major theme is that of the imagination of the little girl, and we speak largely about two worlds inside that one world, and I will explain all these different aspects in great detail because that's what really makes this short story very fascinating. It really makes no sense to just have a literal reading of this particular story. You need to know the nuances. You need to be able to see what I call the layering of the story done by the author, because the author is not telling you a straight story. There is a larger messaging, there is a larger narrative to the story, and that's what we really need to understand, and especially that's what makes English literature or any literature in any language so fascinating. You need to be able to see the different interpretations, interpret it in your own way, which could be very different from the interpretation of the author, but definitely you should be able to see the different meanings, the different narratives that the author, be it in any story, is actually trying to weave in that poem or short story or in a play. So let's get started without much ado. So it was bitterly cold. I hope you have your book in front of you and a pencil and pen. It was bitterly cold. Snow was falling and darkness was gathering, for it was the last evening of the old year. It was New Year's Eve. Just see the kind of atmosphere that he's able to construct with a very deft use of vocabulary. It was bitterly cold, so it immediately gives you a sense of something very ominous, because cold is usually associated with something negative, something ominous that is likely to happen. So it was bitterly cold, snow was falling and darkness was gathering. It also reminds you of the poem The Cold Within, which we had discussed. The two videos are there in the playlist. It's part of the ICSE Class 9 and Class 10 syllabus, and there also we saw the cold within, and here also the cold is spoken of both in terms of the weather as well as the cold within the people who are actually going to pass by this little girl without showing any empathy for the fact that she has not been able to sell her matchsticks. And darkness was gathering, for it was the last evening of the old year. It was New Year's Eve, that is the 31st of December. In the cold and gloom, a poor little girl walked, bareheaded and barefoot, through the streets. She had been wearing slippers, it is true, when she left home, but what good were they? She was wearing slippers when she left home to come to this town to sell her wares, but what good were they? They had been her mother's. It immediately tells you that they were oversized. They were not her size, so it was obviously uncomfortable to walk with those oversized slippers which belonged to her mother. So you can imagine how big they were. The little girl had lost them as she ran across the street to escape from two carriages that were being driven terribly fast. One slipper could not be found, and a boy who had run off with the other, saying it would come in very handy as a cradle someday when he had children of his own. Two things this particular paragraph tells you straight away. One, The little girl had lost as she ran across the street to escape from the two carriages that were being driven very fast. So you can imagine the kind of atmosphere on December 31st night. People zipping across in their vehicles, in their carriages, not really caring for what is going to happen. Whereas they are in the fast lane, whereas this little girl is actually stationary out there. You see the contrast that the author is able to build just through the one sentence. And then he says that she lost one slipper, and the other slipper had been carried away by a boy who said that he will use it as a cradle for his children, which means essentially he's once again underlining and emphasizing the point that they were just too big for the little girl. She was wearing her mother's slippers that were obviously very, very big. And we will come to an explanation of the cradle. Because one of the questions that it's asked is, whose slippers was she wearing and how did she lose them? The girl had worn her mother's slippers when she left home, so they were big and outsized, and the little girl had lost them as she ran across the street to escape from the two carriages that were being driven very fast. Okay, so the fact that he uses the word cradle is also very ironic, and I would want you to make this point, note down this point. The fact that he is thinking of the little girl's slipper as a cradle. Now, cradle is associated with, cradle is something in which babies are kept when they are lying down or sleeping. He wants it to be used as a cradle when he has children of his own. So he is thinking of a childhood for his own children, or an infancy for his own children, without actually bothering about the childhood of this little girl. So look at the irony. Look at the coldness in the heart of the little boy, that he is not bothered about the childhood of this little girl, that she would feel cold without having slippers of her own and having to walk on those on that road when it is absolutely bitterly cold and snow was falling. So you can imagine how cold, and her feet would get frozen. He is not bothered about the childhood and the discomfort that this child would go through, but is actually thinking of someone who has not even come into this life, and he wants to use it as a cradle for his children. So look at the coldness in the people. This is one of the examples. The other example is of carriages running past without even bothering to look at this little match girl. So the little girl walked about the streets on her naked feet, which were red and blue with the cold. Red and blue with the cold. In her old apron, she carried a great many matches, and she had a packet of them in her hand as well. So she is someone who sells matchsticks for a living. Nobody had bought any from her. Nobody had bought any from her, and no one had given her a single penny all day. She crept along, shivering and hungry, the picture of misery, poor little thing, followed by an exclamation mark. So the exclamation mark is to show the author's sympathy for the little match girl as well, that he is also feeling extremely sorry for her state at that point in time, where her feet have become red and blue because of the snow, walking on the snow barefoot. She's hungry, she's shivering, and she's the picture of misery. And she's just walking along because she's not been able to sell a single matchbox, a single matchstick all through the evening. The snowflakes fell on her long golden hair. So she's a beautiful girl because she has long golden hair. And the snowflakes fell on the hair, which means that she did not have anything to cover her head either. So it gets you a sense, all she's wearing is an apron. An apron is not a jacket. So she's obviously feeling extremely cold as a result of the weather. The snowflakes fell on her long golden hair, which curled so prettily about her neck. But she did not think of her appearance now, because she's only bothered about selling the matchsticks, because that's the only way she'll be able to go back home and give the money to her father. But we'll come to that in a while. Lights were shining in every window, and there was a glorious smell of roast goose in the street, for this was New Year's Eve and she could not think of anything else. She was hungry, and the street was smelling of roast goose. And obviously, her that was evoking a lot of saliva in her mouth. She was feeling more tempted. She was feeling more hungry as a result of all those smells that were pervading the street on New Year's Eve. She huddled down in a heap in a corner formed by two houses. Something like this, almost like a 90 degrees, right? And she sits right in the middle, one of which projected further into the street than the other, right? So one end is protruding further, while she sits in the corner which has been formed by these two buildings. But though she tucked her little legs up under her, she felt colder and colder. It almost reminds you of the cold within, where the poor man gives his coat a hitch just to feel herself a little warm, but it's of no use, and she only feels more and more cold. She did not dare to go home, for she had sold no matches and earned not a single penny. Her father would be sure to beat her. And that brings us to the point of cruelty, right? Of cruelty. The father is straight away cruel, but even the other people, like that boy, like the people on New Year's Eve, are equally cruel. They're not directly cruel. Her father is the one who is directly cruel, because he would beat her if she came home without having earned a single penny. Her father would be sure to beat her, and besides, it was so cold at home, for they had nothing but the roof above them, and the wind whistled through that, even though the largest cracks were stuffed with straw and rags. So it gives you a sense of the absolutely ramshackle, thatched kind of a hut or a house they lived in, because there were too many holes through which the cold wind blew, and they felt even more cold even inside the house, even though they had stuffed the cracks with straw and rags as in old clothes. Her thin hands were almost numb with cold. Haven't you felt that kind of a feeling where you are completely cold as a result of the bitterness of the weather? Her thin hands were almost numb with cold. If only she dared pull just one small match from the packet, strike it on the wall and warm her fingers. So she thought that if she actually lit up one match, it would actually have that fire, and she could actually feel a little warm as a result of that fire, which would just be there for a few seconds, right? She pulled one out, scratch. Just see the way he kind of creates that sense of involving the reader in the story by using the word scratch. He's almost giving you the sound of how the matchstick would have scratched against the matchbox in order to light up. How it spluttered and burned. Okay, it had a warm spluttered, as in the flame when it initially kind of splutters and burnt. It had a warm, bright flame like a tiny candle when she held her hand over it. But what a strange light! It seemed to the little girl as if she were sitting in front of a great iron stove with polished brass knobs and brass ornaments. The fire burned so beautifully and gave out such a lovely warmth. Oh, how wonderful that was! The child had already stretched her feet to warm them too, when out went the flame, the stove vanished, and there she sat with the burnt match in her hand. So the moment it happens, it creates a vision for the little match girl that she was sitting in front of a great iron stove with polished brass knobs and brass ornaments. The fire burned so beautifully and gave such a lovely warmth, and she obviously feels extremely good with the warmth created by the fire. Now let's look closely at what does it mean. Okay, now the vision of a great iron stove with polished brass knobs and brass ornaments it comes immediately after we have been told about the state of our house, and the state of our house is that it has been stuffed with the rags and straw, and the wind blows through it, and this is an immediate contrast to what the life she used to lead in her own house. So probably that's playing on in her mind, which is why the first vision she sees is complete contrast to what the life she experiences inside her own house, where the only permanent resident is the cold wind. And the warmth of the iron stove is in that sense a complete contrast, and therefore it kind of reflects a desire of the little girl to have a life like that, which she misses inside her house. It's a manifestation, it's a reflection of the desire in her heart for warmth that she seeks, and that is an antidote, that's a complete contrast to the miserable cold that she experiences inside her own house. So you're able to understand that this is something which plays on in her mind. So the first vision that she sees is something which will give her some relief, and it's a complete contrast to the life that she leads. So when we are talking about the first vision, give the literal description of what the first vision that she sees, that in which she sees a hot iron stove with brass knobs and brass ornaments, and also give the meaning of that's the first vision, which is in sharp contrast to what we have been told about what life inside her own house is. She struck another. Now that the first flame has gone off, She struck another, it burned clearly, and where the light fell upon the wall, the bricks became transparent. Like gaze, gaze is a material which if you throw light on it, you can almost see through. She could see right into the room where a shining white cloth was spread on the table. It was covered with beautiful china, and in the center of it stood a roast goose. Are you getting the thing? Whatever we have been told so far in the first 1.5 pages is actually coming back in a slightly different form, right? And every time we need to make the connection with what we have been told earlier, right? So it was covered with beautiful china, and in the center of it stood a roast goose stuffed with prunes and apples, steaming deliciously. And what was even more wonderful was that the goose hopped down from the dish, waddled across the floor with carving knife and fork in its back, waddled straight up to the poor child. Then out went the match, and nothing could be seen but the thick, cold wall. So the roast goose is for dinner, and just before we have been told that she could smell roast goose all along the streets, at the restaurants or the eateries or the hotels on the street, she could smell the roast goose. So that is something which is playing on her mind, which is something which she desires for, because she is also hungry. That's also we have been told by the author. So that is something which she sees, and because it's a child's imagination, she almost imagines that the goose stuffed with prunes and apples with knives stuck on its back, it actually comes towards a little match girl, but before she could actually stretch towards her, the light goes off, and that is something which obviously disappoints her, because she is not able to fulfill her wish. So after she has seen the iron stove with the brass knobs and the brass ornaments, this is the second vision that she sees. Now, what is the larger meaning of this particular second vision? The second vision is an expression of her hunger and longing for food, which we have already been told. And also because, as I said, she has smelt roast goose earlier on the street. It's also an indication of her starvation. She's hungry, she's absolutely starved. And the fact that she will never be able to feast on roast goose in her life, in her real life, but just the vision of it, just the thought of it, just the imagination of it makes her feel very, very happy. And she even sees a vision of the carving knife and the fork walking across the floor, and these are all visual manifestations of her inner desires. Visual manifestations of her inner desires. Please note down this particular phrase, right? She struck another match. Now we come to the third match. She struck another match, and suddenly she was sitting under the most beautiful Christmas tree. It was much larger and much lovelier than the one she had seen last year through the glass doors of the rich merchant's house. 1,000 candles lit up the green branches, and gaily colored balls like those in the shop windows looked down upon her. The little girl reached forward with both hands, then out went the match. The many candles on the Christmas tree rose higher and higher through the air, and she saw that they had now turned into bright stars. One of them fell, streaking the sky with light. This is an extremely important vision, the third vision, because now she sees a Christmas tree. Now, what is the messaging from the Christmas tree? The Christmas tree is, of course, it's also the Christmas spirit. The Christmas festival has just got over 5 days back, and now we are on December 31st. Christmas, again, because of Santa Claus, is a festival that most children look forward to, because it's a festival to celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ, when Santa Claus comes with gifts for little children. He's someone who is seen to be loving children, right? So it's obviously a festival that all children look forward to. From the match girl's perspective, from the little match girl's perspective, it's obvious that she has not received any gifts for Christmas. All she has done last year, of course, is to look through the window at the Christmas tree at the house of a rich merchant. But this Christmas, she doesn't seem to have received any Christmas gift. The festival, obviously, would have been as cold and as gloomy for her as December 31st is. But in her mind, in her imagination, she sees the vision of a beautiful Christmas tree, lovelier than the one that she had seen last year through the glass door. Now, just look at the construct of this particular paragraph, part of the story. The fact that he says that she had seen this, she had seen last year through the glass doors of the rich merchant's house, which means she's outside and the Christmas tree is inside through the glass door. it's an indication of her status of an outsider in society, someone who cannot gain entry, someone who is not allowed entry. So you understand the larger societal meaning that the author is actually driving at, that her status is that of an outsider. She is not given entry into the house to see the Christmas tree at close quarters. She can only see it outside of a glass door, and she finds the green branches. She still remembers that the green how it was, and about how this one was much better than the one that she had seen last year. And this one, the green branches were glittering with 1,000 candles and colored balls like the one she had seen in the shop window. In seeing this vision, it's a complete departure from her real world existence of poverty. It's a complete contrast and a departure from her real life world of poverty. And just in that moment of a few seconds, till that part that the vision was there as a result of the flame of the matchstick, she's able to create a vision of a glorious Christmas for herself. She's able to create the vision of a glorious Christmas for herself, as if this particular tree that she's seeing in that third vision as a result of the lighting of the third matchstick, this Christmas tree is exclusively for the little match girl. It provides joy and pleasure only for her, and that gives her extraordinary happiness and joy. So you understand the longing of a little match girl, which this little matchstick is actually fulfilling for her. The little matchstick, which we always think of not being very useful besides lighting up the fire, but here an entire existence is being created. An entire world of joy and happiness is being created for the little match girl, showing her extraordinarily delicious food which she has been longing for, showing her a Christmas tree because she wanted to be part of the Christmas festival, which she was not. So in that sense, it's providing her a lot of joy exclusively, which the real world is not providing. So the imaginative world, the imaginary world is providing her joys which the real world has not. I hope I'm being very, very clear, because it's a very fascinating kind of story, and the explanations actually make it much more fascinating. If you really delve into these kind of stories with that much of detail, do not skim the surface, because that's how English literature is to be enjoyed and appreciated. And if you are able to include some of these points in your answers, your answer will look that much more rich and endowed. Now one of the stars fell, streaking the sky with lights. Now someone is dying, said the little girl, for her old grandmother, the only one who had ever been good to her, but who was now dead. So the grandmother as the other character who has been introduced. The only other character is that boy who ran away with a slipper, and the father who is cruel to her. The third character who is told is the grandmother. Now someone is dying, said the little girl, for her old grandmother, the only one who had ever been good to her. So there was, apart from her father, the grandmother who was very loving to her, who was now dead, had said, whenever a star falls, a soul goes up to God. She struck another match on the wall. Once more there was light, and in the glow stood her old grandmother, the fourth matchstick. Oh, so bright and shining, and looking so gentle, kind and loving. Granny, cried the little girl, oh, take me with you. I know you will disappear before the match is burnt out. You will vanish like the warm stove, the lovely roast goose, and the great glorious Christmas tree. Then she quickly struck up all the rest of the matches, because she doesn't want to lose the vision of her grandmother, the only person who had loved her. So you see the sense of desperation of the little girl, that this time she does not want to lose her grandmother. She has lost 3 visions in the past, of the iron stove, of the roasted goose and the Christmas tree. But the moment she sees her grandmother, the person who loved her the most, this time she does not want to lose her. So she strikes up all the matches in order to ensure that the glow, the vision is there for a longer time. Then she quickly struck up all the rest of the matches she has in her packet, for she did so want to keep her grandmother with her. The matches flared up with such a blaze that it was brighter than broad daylight. Look at the flourish with which Hans Andersen has written this. And her old grandmother had never seemed so beautiful or so stately before. She took the little girl in her arms and flew with her high up, oh so high, towards glory and joy. Now they knew neither cold nor hunger nor fear, for they were both with God. So this is the point at which the little girl goes away with her grandmother, which means she has also passed away. But look at the positive imagery with which the author is actually telling you this particular moment in her life, that they went up and they no longer knew cold or hunger or fear, because they were both now with God, right? The imagery of the star falling. Now, generally it's believed in Christian faith that bright stars are like the departed souls, and that's what is told to children, which is why in her childish imagination, in the innocence of her imagination, that's what she believes, and probably this was told to her by her grandmother, who is no more. She sees the star falling when the many candles on the Christmas tree rose higher and higher through the air, turned into bright stars. Now, what it essentially means is, 1 minute, yeah, we'll talk about the vision of the grandmother. Now, the dead grandmother is so important because she is the only one who has brought comfort to the little girl. And the vision, therefore, is described, and this is very important, as bright and shining and looking so gentle, kind and loving. Please underline these words, and you would be good enough to use these words in your answer, because that would make your answer look much better if you embellish it with these words. Since all her dreams and visions are a reflection of her desires and wishes, this shows that it is affection, love and kindness that the girl was deprived of and wanted so badly. So it's also a commentary, and this is important. The grandmother is contrasted with the father. I was telling you, each of the vision is actually a contrast to her real life. The grandmother is a contrast to the lack of parental love, the fact that her father is cruel, who beats her up. So and the lack of empathy by society in general, the grandmother stands out as a contrast. So each of the visions is actually a contrast to what happens to her in real life. And because she knows that the vision of the grandmother won't last long with that single matchstick, which is why in her desperation she lights up all the matchsticks. Because the matches, what is the significance of the matches? And which is why it's also used in the title, is that the matches and that the glow that they provide are a vehicle for the girl to move from a life of misery to a life where she can be with her grandmother and get all her love and affection in heaven. So it's a vehicle which actually transports her from a miserable life to a better life. The fact that she lights up all the matches is because she wants to get away from this life of hunger, of apathy, life of misery on earth. But in the cold dawn, in the corner formed by the two houses, sat the little girl with rosy cheeks and smiling, lips dead, frozen to death on the last evening of the old year. The dawn of the new year rose on the huddled figure of the girl. She was still holding the matches, and half a packet had been burned. So she had managed to exhaust only half the packet that she had with her. She was evidently trying to warm herself, people said, but no one knew what beautiful vision she had seen and in what a blaze of glory she had entered with her dear old grandmother into the heavenly joy and gladness of a new year. So the people obviously thought that she was trying to warm herself with the matchsticks because they saw the burnt matchsticks in her hand lying around. But they did not know what she had seen in her last moments. And that's what the last moments of the girl, extremely important. Again, it can come as a question as to what were the last moments of the girl like and what's the importance of the matches. The importance of the matches, I've already told you that they were a vehicle for her to be transported from a life of apathy, a life of misery, a life of hunger to a life in heaven where she could get the love and affection of her grandmother. But like the matches, which are also temporary, they last only for a while. They bring her happiness and warmth, which is why in her desperation she lights up most of the matches that she had. Fire, which is created as a result of these matches, is also seen as a harbinger of positivity. It's seen as a vehicle of positivity, in sharp contrast to the coldness of the weather and the coldness of the people. So fire as a contrast to the coldness of the weather on the night of December 31st. The flames, of course, are short-lived because it's only one matchstick that she is lighting up at a time. So her dreams remain unfulfilled. The dreams remain unfulfilled, but they provide her happiness momentarily for that little period of time. Also notice the kind of words that the author has used when she is no more. He describes her as a little girl with rosy cheeks. We have already been told about her golden hair and smiling lips frozen to death. So smiling lips and rosy cheeks along with golden hair gives you the vision of somebody who was a very pretty girl. Also, this is a story about a lot of vivid imagination on part of the little girl, and the last moments have also been described with a lot of I mean, they have been described in a very delicate manner, right? The fact that the title of the story is The Little Match Girl is also in some way a reflection of the little time that each matchstick actually glows. Just like the life of the little girl is also short. She is obviously not very old, yet she is asked to go out and sell those matchsticks, child labor being used. So the matchstick glow is short-lived, just like the life of the little girl. The other points, if okay, I'll just go through these other notes that I have with me, which I had prepared. What are the main themes depicted in the story? The main theme is, of course, that of poverty, of hunger, of lack of empathy, and the author sets it on December 31st. Ironically, because December 31st is a day when people are expected to extend love and affection for the other person, greetings to the other person, but here we are seeing that people are just rushing around in their carriages, driving them at high speed without actually bothering for someone who is completely hungry out in the bitter cold, having not earned a single penny. It's also, the larger theme is also that of childhood desires and aspirations which are unfulfilled in the case of the little match girl. The other theme is that of lack of caring by the society in general, which is why we are talking of two worlds. That one world is that of the imagination of the little girl, and the other world is the real world, and the real world is the uncaring world. The people out to make merry on New Year's Eve are completely blind, are completely oblivious to the situation of this little match girl, because she, unlike these people who can make merry and go back home to enjoy themselves, this girl cannot go back home unless she is able to earn money after selling the matchstick. So look at the predicament, look at the helplessness of this little girl out there in the bitter cold. So equally uncaring and abusive is her father, who will beat her up if she comes back without selling anything. And therefore it's a commentary on the kind of uncaring people we have become, and the only person who provides a contrast is the grandmother. So we have the father, we have the people rushing around in the carriages, people in general who don't buy anything from her, and of course the boy who runs away with one of her slippers. And in contrast, there is the grandmother. The people do not have the eyes to see the plight of hungry faces like that of the little match girl, which is why this story has a universal appeal. This story could have been set in any city. Remember, this story does not identify the little girl, does not identify the city. That's very important, which is why the story has such a universal appeal. It could actually be set in any city of the world on the 31st of December, and this could be the story of any girl in any part, in any city of the world. The irony that the girl cannot achieve all these desires in her life is also only possible in heaven, which is why the author calls it a blaze of glory in which she enters heaven and talks of heavenly joy and gladness of a new year. So the new year, of course, brings change for her, but not in her life, but in her death. The new year does bring a change for her, not in her life, but in her death. So the larger messaging from this story is that we need to have compassion for people who are less privileged than us, have empathy, have sympathy, have a heart in the right place, and that is what is the larger messaging from this story. A very fascinating story, which I like for the fact that it has various layers told through a very simple technique of lighting of a matchstick and using a very vivid imagination as that. If you have any doubts in any part of the story, do write into us in the comment section, and I would attempt to answer those queries, or you could write to us at our Gmail ID studywithsudhir@gmail.com, and do continue to watch this video and the YouTube channel, because we still have a few more chapters of the ICSE class 10 to finish, which should be done with in about a week from now. Thank you very much for watching.